The signal that shouldn't exist. The vast emptiness of space stretched endlessly before the Black Phantom Armada. The fleet was feared across the galaxy, known for its unstoppable force and ruthless efficiency. They were Earth's silent guardians, a force that had only been unleashed in the darkest of times. Admiral Kane Voss sat in his command chair aboard the Horizon's Wrath, the flagship of the fleet. His piercing eyes scanned the holographic displays, showing the vast formation of battlecruisers, dreadnoughts, and destroyers under his command. The fleet was currently in deep space standby mode, waiting for new orders from Earth. But then, a signal appeared on the comms screen. The bridge crew immediately stiffened. Unscheduled transmissions in deep space were never a good sign. Signals meant intelligence leaks, distress calls, or worse, an enemy trap. "Origin?" Kane asked, his voice calm but firm. The communications officer, Lieutenant Darius Holt, hesitated before answering. "Unknown, sir. The signal doesn't match any known galactic relay stations." That was impossible. Every inhabited system in the galaxy was mapped, every signal source cataloged. There were no unknowns left, or at least there shouldn't be. Kane leaned forward. "Run it through decryption. Let's hear it." Holt's fingers moved over the console, filtering the ancient distortions from the transmission. Then, through the ship's speakers, a voice emerged, garbled, static-filled, but unmistakably human. "Help us, please, before they wake up." A chill ran through the bridge. The message was weak, desperate, almost like a whisper from a ghost. Kane's second-in-command, Commander Area Locke, frowned. That voice, it sounds old, like it was recorded centuries ago. She wasn't wrong. The frequency itself was ancient, one that had not been used by Earth in over 500 years. The last known logs of such signals were classified, linked to forgotten fleets and lost ships. Kane's fingers drummed against his armrest. He had seen many things in his long military career, but this was different. This felt wrong. "Coordinates. Tracing now." "Got it," Holt confirmed. "Sir, this can't be right. The signal is coming from the Vega Expanse." A heavy silence filled the bridge. The Vega Expanse was a graveyard, a star system where hundreds of ships had disappeared, swallowed by the void. No one dared to enter it, and even the Galactic Council had declared it off-limits. Ships that ventured too close never returned. Aria shook her head. "There's no way a human signal is coming from there." Kane didn't believe in coincidences. If a 500-year-old human signal had just activated from a cursed system, then something wasn't right. He turned to his navigation officer. "Prepare for a full fleet jump. I want stealth protocols activated. No unnecessary signals." "Sir," Aria's voice was cautious. "You really think this is a good idea?" The last expedition to Vega was over a century ago, and they never came back. Kane met her gaze. "That's exactly why we need to go." She sighed, but she knew there was no changing his mind. Black Phantom Armada did not ignore warnings. They investigated them. Within minutes, the fleet's massive warp drives hummed to life. The countdown began. 5. The signal grew stronger, as if the unseen sender knew they were coming. 4. The distress message played again. The voice sounded more distorted this time. "Help. Before. Wake up." 3. The crew shifted uneasily. Kane kept his expression neutral, hiding his own unease. 2. The star system coordinates locked in. 1. With a massive burst of light, the Black Phantom Armada vanished into the void, heading straight into a system that had swallowed countless ships before them. But this time, the ghosts of Vega were waiting. Arrival at the graveyard of ships. The Black Phantom Armada tore through space, exiting warp just outside the Vega Expanse. The moment they arrived, a chill settled over the fleet. Before them lay a stellar graveyard, a massive expanse of derelict warships, floating in eerie silence. Some were ancient human vessels, their hulls scared and rusted beyond recognition. Others were alien ships, belonging to empires long forgotten. The most unsettling part, none of them were moving. Admiral Kane Voss sat in his command chair, his gaze fixed on the viewscreen. Even for a man who had seen countless battles, this was unnerving. Status report. Commander Area Locke scanned her console, her fingers moving swiftly. No active energy readings. Admiral. All ships appear dead. Lieutenant Darius Holt adjusted his communications frequency. The signal is still transmitting, but it's weak. It's coming from Fat. His voice trailed off as the Horizon's Wrath's massive scanners locked onto a structure twice the size of a dreadnought. It was an Earth supercarrier. And not just any supercarrier. Identification confirmed, the AI chimed in, its mechanical voice cutting through the tension. Designation, EHS Titanfall. Last recorded status, missing in action, Earth year 3047. Kane's hands clenched into fists. The Titanfall had been one of the greatest warships ever built, designed for interstellar supremacy. It vanished 500 years ago, swallowed by the void. And yet, here it was, sitting motionless, as if waiting for them. Aria's eyes widened. This isn't possible, Holt whispered, but it's real. The entire bridge crew stared at the massive hulk of metal drifting before them. It was damaged, yet intact, its hull covered in scorch marks and battle scars. And then, the lights flickered on. One by one, the dead ship came to life. Faint emergency lights pulsed from within, illuminating long-forgotten corridors. Engines that had been silent for centuries thrummed weakly, as if they were waking from a deep slumber. Then, without warning, the distress signal changed. It wasn't static anymore. It was clearer. If you can hear this, it's already too late. The word sent a shiver through the entire bridge. Kane exhaled slowly. Prepare a boarding party. Aria's head snapped toward him. You can't be serious. Something sent that signal, Aria. Asterisk, 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 asterisk. And if there's even a chance that survivors are still on board, we need to know. She hesitated before giving a curt nod. I'm coming with you. Kane didn't argue. He knew she wouldn't back down. Within minutes, the boarding team assembled, a squad of elite Void Marines armed with high-powered pulse rifles and exosuits designed for zero-G combat. As their dropship detached from the fleet and drifted toward the Titanfall, Kane stared at the ancient behemoth. The ship was waiting for them, and Kane had the uneasy feeling that whatever was inside was awake. Inside the Titanfall, the boarding team breached the airlock with precision, entering the dark, metallic corridors of the Titanfall. The moment they stepped inside, their comms crackled with static. Kane activated his helmet's night vision, revealing a hallway lined with frost-covered walls. The ship's life support had clearly been offline for centuries, yet somehow, the interior was preserved. This is Voss. We've entered the Titanfall. No movement so far. The team advanced cautiously, their boots echoing in the hollow corridors. Then, something moved. A faint shadow flickered at the edge of Kane's vision. He raised his rifle, but the hallway was empty. Aria cursed under her breath. Something is watching us. Holt, monitoring from the Horizon's Wrath, suddenly panicked. Admiral, we just picked up a biometric reading. Humanoid. But it's wrong. Kane's grip tightened around his rifle. Define wrong. Holt hesitated. It's human, but it's also something else. Before Kane could respond, the Titanfall's speakers screeched, a horrible, garbled distortion of static and whispers. Then came the voice. You shouldn't have come. The lights above them shattered, plunging the corridor into darkness. And then the screaming began. The ghost fleet awakens. Darkness swallowed the team. The shattered lights flickered weakly, casting eerie, shifting shadows across the frozen metal corridors of the Titanfall. The Black Phantom Armada's elite boarding team, handpicked for their discipline and fearlessness, stood rigid, weapons raised, scanning for movement. Then the screaming stopped. A heavy silence fell, thick and oppressive, as if the ship itself were holding its breath. Admiral Kane Voss activated his helmet's thermal scanner, expecting to see clear outlines of his team. Instead, the display glitched, flickering wildly between static and strange shapes that didn't quite resemble human forms. Commander Area Locke whispered through her comms. "I don't like this, Kane. Something's here." He didn't need to be told. He felt it. A presence. Watching them. Stalking them. Then a voice, faint, fragmented, but unmistakably human, echoed from the ship's long-dead intercom system. "If you can hear this, leave now." A metallic clunk sounded above them. Then another. Something was crawling through the vents. The soldiers aimed their rifles at the ceiling as the sound intensified, moving fast, impossibly fast, darting from vent to vent like a predator circling its prey. Kane exhaled slowly. "Stay sharp. We're not alone." Then the Titanfall moved. The entire ship shuddered violently, throwing them against the walls. The floor beneath them groaned and shifted, as if something enormous had just stirred deep within the vessel. Lieutenant Darius Holt's panicked voice crackled through their comms from the horizon's wrath. "Admiral, the derelict ship surround us." Kane didn't hear the rest, because suddenly, the Titanfall's emergency lighting turned blood red, and with it, the dead ships outside came to life. The graveyard wakes. From the bridge of the horizon's wrath, Lieutenant Holt watched in horror as the once lifeless ships in the Vega expanse began to move. Hundreds of derelict warships, belonging to both human and alien fleets long thought destroyed, now shifted their positions as if responding to an unseen command. A massive Kraken-class dreadnought, its hull blackened by age, slowly pivoted, its long dormant weapon systems sparking to life. A nearby alien cruiser, missing half its structure, adjusted its course, aligning perfectly with the human fleet. And then, in eerie unison, they turned their weapons toward the Black Phantom Armada. Holt's breath caught in his throat. "Admiral, we have a problem." On board the Titanfall, Kane and his team could already feel it. The air grew colder. The walls seemed to pulse, as if the ship itself were breathing. Then, the lights in the corridor had flickered, and something stepped into view. The Forgotten Ones. At first glance, it looked human. A soldier, clad in a Black Phantom Armada uniform, standing eerily still in the flickering red glow of the emergency lights. But then Kane noticed the details. The uniform was torn, decayed, as if it had been worn for centuries. The skin beneath the armor was pale, almost translucent, stretched tightly over an emaciated form. And the eyes. Black. Endless voids where human pupils should have been. Then it smiled. A grotesque, inhuman grin, far too wide for any normal mouth. And it spoke. "Welcome back, Admiral." The voice was a distorted mix of several overlapping tones, as if multiple voices were speaking through one mouth. Kane's blood turned ice cold. Arya raised her rifle. "What the hell is that?" The thing that had once been a soldier tilted its head. "We waited so long for someone to come home." Then, with inhuman speed, it lunged. Gunfire erupted. Pulse rounds tore through the corridor, illuminating the nightmare unfolding before them. The thing didn't die. Instead, as the bullets ripped through its flesh, it simply twisted and reformed, like liquid metal snapping back into place. And then more came. From the shadows, from the vents, from the very walls themselves, dozens of them, all wearing the decayed uniforms of Earth's lost fleets, their bodies warped, their humanity long gone. Kane and his team fell back, firing relentlessly as the creatures closed in. And all around them, the Titanfall's halls echoed with one sound. Laughter. Twisted, distorted, broken laughter. Outside, the fleet's last stand. The Black Phantom Armada had always been the galaxy's most feared war machine, but against an enemy that didn't die, even their legendary firepower was useless. The derelict ships in the Vega expanse opened fire, unleashing a barrage of energy beams and plasma shells. The Black Phantom fleet retaliated, their dreadnoughts and battlecruisers unleashing a storm of destruction. But every ship they destroyed simply reformed. Holt watched in mute horror as the wreckage of an alien destroyer pulled itself back together, the broken pieces snapping into place like a living organism. Then the Titanfall sent out a new signal. A single transmission, broadcasting to every ship in the fleet. A single word: assimilate. And then, the first human ships turned against their own. The impossible choice. On board the Titanfall, Kane knew what needed to be done. There was only one way out. They couldn't fight these things, not conventionally. But he had one last ace to play. The Titanfall's core still contained a dormant antimatter bomb, installed as a last resort failsafe when it was originally built. If he could manually detonate it, the resulting explosion would erase everything in the Vega expanse, including the creatures that had hijacked the fleet. There was just one problem. It could only be activated from the core itself. A suicide mission. Aria turned to him, already knowing what he was thinking. She shook her head. No, not happening. Kane met her gaze. Aria, we don't have a choice. She punched him in the chest. Hard. Then, before he could react, she locked his command codes, disabling his ability to activate the bomb remotely. She smiled sadly. I'm making the call this time, Admiral. Before Kane could stop her, she was gone, running toward the core, rifle in hand. And in the distance, the creatures laughed. The unkillable enemy. The sacrifice begins. Commander Aria Locke ran through the Titanfall's frozen corridors, her pulse rifle clutched tightly in her hands. She could hear the inhuman howls echoing behind her. Twisted voices, laughing and whispering at the same time. She didn't look back, because she knew what was coming. These things, these abominations, weren't just resurrected soldiers. They were something far worse. The Titanfall was never just a ship. It was a prison, a tomb for something that should never have been created. And now, it was awake. She reached the primary reactor core, the massive structure looming over her like a metallic heart, its surface covered in frost and veins of pulsating black metal. She didn't hesitate. Aria ripped open the control panel, bypassing the outdated security protocols. The Titanfall's core still held a dormant antimatter bomb, a last resort failsafe meant to ensure this ship never fell into enemy hands. Ironically, it was now their only hope. She typed in the manual override codes, setting the bomb to detonate in 5 minutes. As soon as she confirmed the sequence, a voice echoed from behind her. You can't kill what's already dead. She spun around, raising her rifle, and froze. A figure stood in the doorway. A man. But not just any man. Admiral Ethan Holloway, the original commander of the Titanfall, the man who had been missing for 500 years. And yet he stood before her, completely unchanged. His uniform was still pristine, his golden insignia gleaming under the dim reactor lights. His face was calm, his expression eerily serene. Aria felt her throat go dry. That's impossible. Holloway took a slow step forward, his polished boots clicking against the frozen floor. We were Earth's best, he said softly. The finest warriors, the greatest minds. We were chosen to lead humanity into a new age. His black eyes locked onto hers. And now, we will. Then his face changed. It twisted, stretching unnaturally. His skin darkened, rippling as tendrils of shadow crawled beneath it. His mouth opened too wide, revealing a row of teeth that weren't human anymore. Aria fired. The pulse rifle's blue energy blasts ripped into his chest, but he didn't even flinch. Holloway smiled and lunged. The battle outside. A war against the unstoppable. In the void beyond the Titanfall, the Black Phantom Armada was losing. The derelict fleet was no longer a collection of dead ships. It was an unstoppable legion, driven by a force beyond comprehension. Admiral Kane Voss gritted his teeth as he watched a human battlecruiser, one of his own, suddenly turn on its allies, unleashing a devastating barrage of plasma cannons. Holt's panicked voice rang through the comms. "We're losing ships. They're assimilating our fleet." Kane clenched his fists. This wasn't just a battle anymore. It was a takeover. Whatever was controlling the Titanfall, it wasn't just resurrecting the dead. It was converting the living. And if they didn't end this now, it would spread, until all of humanity belonged to it. Kane activated the fleet-wide comms. "All remaining ships, fall back. Prepare for emergency warp now." But before anyone could respond, the Titanfall's voice echoed through the entire system. A deep, inhuman whisper, speaking in 1,000 voices at once. "There is no escape." And then, a pulse wave erupted from the Titanfall's core. The energy swept across the battlefield, crashing into the fleet like a tidal wave. Inside the Horizon's wrath, Kane and Holt screamed as their systems short-circuited. Every human ship shut down instantly, their engines dying, their weapons going offline. The entire Black Phantom Armada was now trapped in dead space. And the enemy? They were still moving. Inside the Titanfall, a fight for survival. Aria hit the ground hard, her ribs screaming in pain as Holloway loomed over her. She tried to crawl away, but he grabbed her by the throat, lifting her effortlessly into the air. His face was splitting apart, shifting between human and something else. "Do you understand now?" Holloway whispered. "We were the chosen ones. We were meant to evolve, to become more." Aria gasped, struggling against his grip. "You became monsters." Holloway's head tilted, as if considering her words. Then he grinned. "Evolution is never painless." Aria's vision was blurring. She could feel the cold seeping into her skin, her mind fading. And then, a gunshot rang out. Holloway staggered back, black liquid oozing from his forehead. Aria collapsed to the ground, coughing, gasping for air. As Admiral Kane stepped into the room, holding a smoking pistol. "Get up." She gritted her teeth, forcing herself to stand. Holloway's body twitched, and then, impossibly, he started regenerating. Kane tossed Aria a small control pad. "Tell me you armed that bomb." Aria's fingers flew over the pad, checking the countdown. 1 minute left. Kane nodded. "Then let's get the hell out of here." They turned, and Holloway screamed. The entire Titanfall shook violently, its walls warping as the ship itself began transforming. Tendrils of black metal erupted from the floors and walls, trying to trap them. They ran. Behind them, the Titanfall's core began to glow, a blinding white light building as the antimatter bomb neared detonation. They burst into the docking bay, boarding the last remaining dropship. Aria slammed the controls, launching the ship out into space seconds before the explosion. And then, the Titanfall detonated. A colossal shockwave erupted through the Vega expanse, consuming everything. The Ghost Fleet, the corrupted ships, the remains of whatever horrors had lived aboard the Titanfall, all of it was wiped from existence. And as the explosion's light faded, the comms crackled to life. Holt's voice, breathless. "The enemy ships, they're gone." It worked. Kane exhaled slowly. It was over. Or so they thought. The aftermath. A final warning. Back aboard the Horizon's wrath, the crew was still shaken, the bridge filled with the aftermath of battle. Kane sat in his chair, staring at the empty void where the Titanfall had once been. Then, the ship's eye chimed. "Admiral, we have received one final transmission." Kane frowned. "From who?" The AI hesitated. "From the Titanfall." Kane's stomach twisted. "Play it." The message was short. It was Holloway's voice. You only delayed the inevitable. And then, silence. Kane leaned back, exhaling. This wasn't over. This was just the beginning. The unkillable return. A fragile victory. The horizon's wrath drifted through the silent void, its hull scorched from the battle that had just ended. The Titanfall was gone. The Vega Expanse was a graveyard once more. And yet, Admiral Kane Voss felt no relief. On the bridge, the crew was working in dead silence. Normally, after such a victory, there would be cheers, celebrations for surviving the impossible. But today, there was only dread. Kane sat in his command chair, staring at the screen where the Titanfall's last transmission still echoed in his mind. You only delayed the inevitable. Commander Area Locke, her face bruised from the fight, approached him. She set a data pad on his console. We've confirmed it, sir, she said quietly. Every corrupted ship was destroyed in the explosion. Kane nodded but said nothing. Area hesitated. We should be celebrating. Kane finally looked at her, his jaw tight. Are you celebrating? She didn't answer. Because they both knew the truth. This wasn't over. Something was wrong. And then, the AI voice echoed through the ship. Admiral, we are detecting an anomaly. Kane sat up straighter. Define anomaly. The holographic map of the Vega Expanse appeared before them. Where there had once been only debris and empty space, a single signal remained. And it was coming from inside the explosion's aftermath. Kane's blood ran cold. That's not possible. Area leaned closer to the screen, her fingers tightening. There's no way anything could have survived that blast. Then the signal changed. At first, it was static. Then, a voice. Not human. Not machine. Something. In between. We are still here. The phantom signal. The bridge crew froze. We are still here. The voice came through again, distorted, layered with hundreds of overlapping whispers. Area's hands hovered over the controls. Sir, should we respond? Kane exhaled slowly. He knew every first contact protocol, every communication strategy that Earth's fleets had ever devised. But this wasn't a contact mission. This was a warning. No, Kane said. We listen. The signal continued, but this time, the whispers began forming words. You think you won. You think you destroyed us. Then, a pause. And the next word sent a chill through everyone on board. The Titanfall was only the first. Kane and Area exchanged a horrified look. The first. Area turned to Holt, who was monitoring the fleet's long-range scanners. Tell me we're not picking up anything else. Holt's face had gone pale. His hands were shaking as he turned to them. Sir, we are. He tapped his console, and the holographic map expanded outward, showing the surrounding systems. And then, they saw them. Hundreds of identical signals blinking across the galaxy. Every single one was an old Earth ship, thought to be lost, destroyed, or missing for centuries. And now, all of them were awakening. The unseen war begins. Kane clenched his fists. We need to get ahead of this. Area exhaled sharply. What are we even fighting? It's not a fleet, it's a disease. Kane finished for her. A corruption. And it's spreading. Holt's voice was barely a whisper. Sir, we might be too late. Kane turned back to the holographic map, watching as the signals flared to life, one by one. The Titanfall wasn't an accident. It wasn't just an anomaly. It was a prototype, a test, a warning. And now, the real war was about to begin. The unknown threat. Back in the Vega Expanse, where the Titanfall had once been, something shifted within the ruins. The debris floated silently. But then, a piece of twisted black metal pulsed. It wasn't dead. It was growing. Slowly, the fragments of the Titanfall started to reassemble themselves, pulled together by something unseen. And in the heart of it all, A single eye blinked open. It was watching, waiting. Because Kane was right. The Titanfall was only the first. And now, they were ready. The awakening of the forgotten. The calm before the storm. The horizon's wrath drifted through deep space, the weight of impending doom suffocating the bridge crew. No one spoke, no one moved. The holographic display of the galactic map remained on screen, showing the terrifying reality. Hundreds of derelict human ships, long lost, were activating across the galaxy. Area Locke sat on the edge of the command table, her gaze locked onto the blinking red signals. "This isn't just a threat, Kane," she whispered. "This is an invasion." Admiral Kane Voss rubbed his temples, his mind racing through every possible option. They had destroyed the Titanfall. That was supposed to be the end of it. But instead, it had triggered something far worse. "We need intel," Kane said, his voice sharp. "Holt, find me the closest active ship, something we can intercept and analyze." Holt's fingers flew across the console. After a few tense seconds, his face paled. "I found one," he murmured. "And you're not going to like it." The holographic map zoomed in, revealing a single massive warship, far larger than the Titanfall, drifting near the edge of a colonized human world. Its name appeared on screen. HFY Sci-Fi. Status: Lost. Earth year 2998. Current status: Active. Unknown command. Kane's stomach twisted. That ship disappeared over 700 years ago. Aria's voice was grim. And now it's back. The Valkyrian. The Horizon's Wrath entered the Valkyrian system under full stealth mode, its advanced cloaking field concealing it from enemy sensors. But the moment they arrived, Kane felt it. The same chill, the same pressure in his chest. Something unnatural was waiting for them. The Valkyrian drifted silently ahead, its hull covered in massive scars, black veins of alien material creeping across its surface. Unlike the Titanfall, this ship had a different presence. It felt more alive. And it was watching them. Holt whispered, "Sir, it's scanning us." Kane's heart pounded. Impossible. We're cloaked. But then, the Valkyrian's comms opened. A signal broadcasted directly to the Horizon's Wrath. A voice poured into the ship's speakers, distorted, layered with inhuman echoes. "We see you." Every light on the Horizon's Wrath flickered violently. And then, the Valkyrian moved. Boarding the Nightmare. Kane didn't have a choice. If they didn't act fast, the Valkyrian could attack the nearby human colony. He assembled a strike team, this time, bringing some of Earth's most advanced AI combat drones, programmed to fight against unknown threats. They entered the Valkyrian through a docking breach, stepping into a world that should not exist. The interior was wrong. Corridors that should have been straight were curved. Hallways shifted subtly, as if the ship were breathing. The walls weren't just metal anymore. They were organic, pulsing. Kane kept his rifle raised, scanning the area. "Stay alert. Anything moves, you shoot." Aria shivered. "I hate this already." Then, a whisper. They all heard it, echoing from deep inside the ship. "Help us, please." Aria froze. "Did you hear that?" Kane nodded, gripping his weapon tighter. It's the same voice from the Titanfall. The horror dawned on them at once. This wasn't just another lost ship. It was part of the same infection. And then, ahead of them, the hallway twisted, warping as something stepped into view. A figure, tall and impossibly thin, its skin stretched over sharp bones, wearing what used to be a black Phantom Armada officer's uniform. Its head jerked sharply toward them, and it smiled. "Welcome home, Admiral. The unkillable takeover." The creature lunged with inhuman speed, forcing Kane and his team to open fire. Pulse rounds tore through its rotting flesh, but instead of dying, the wounds sealed shut instantly. Kane cursed. "Fall back. It's regenerating." The AI combat drones unleashed a barrage of high-energy plasma, burning the creature down to ash. Silence. For a moment, they thought it was over. Then, from every corridor, every vent, every shadow, dozens more appeared. They came crawling on the walls, walking upside down on the ceiling, their blackened eyes locked onto the humans. And then they spoke. "Join us." Kane's blood turned to ice. Arya grabbed his arm. "Kane, we have to go." The AI drones self-destructed, unleashing a chain explosion that sent fire ripping through the corridors. They ran. The Valkyrian itself was alive, shifting around them, closing off escape routes, pushing them deeper into its maze. And then they reached the core and saw it, the truth beneath the flesh. The heart of the Valkyrian was a massive chamber lined with tendrils of pulsing black material. Suspended in the center was something horrifying, a massive humanoid figure embedded into the ship itself. Its body was merged with the machinery, its arms stretched unnaturally, its face half human, half something else. It was alive. And it opened its eyes. Kane and Arya froze as the figure's lips curled into an eerie smile. "I remember you." Arya's voice was barely a whisper. "Oh my God. Kane. Fats." Kane couldn't breathe. Because he recognized the face. It was Admiral Ethan Holloway, the man who had died on the Titanfall, the man they had killed. And yet, he was here. No longer human, no longer dead, and he was waiting for them. The final battle. The face of the nightmare. The Horizon's Wrath's boarding team stood frozen, staring in horror at the thing that was once Admiral Ethan Holloway, a grotesque fusion of man and machine, bound to the living core of the Valkyrian. His eyes, once sharp and commanding, were now black voids, endless and unknowable. His skin, stretched too thin, pulsed with veins of dark metal, his very being woven into the ship like a parasitic growth. He smiled, his voice layered with thousands of whispers. "You should not have come." Kane Voss felt a cold dread settle in his chest. The Titanfall had been bad enough. But this, the Valkyrian was no longer a ship. It was a conscious being, a grotesque hive mind of twisted human souls, something that had been growing, evolving, waiting. And now it was awake. The unkillable fleet moves. Back aboard the Horizon's Wrath, Lieutenant Darius Holt's fingers flew across his control panel as he watched in horror. The Valkyrian wasn't alone. Across the system, other derelict warships, ships once thought lost, were now moving, forming a massive fleet. Their weapons powered up simultaneously, and the eerie red glow of their engines burned like the eyes of a waking god. A message pulsed across the ship's communication systems, a single phrase in distorted, broken voices. "The second age of humanity begins." Holt's heart hammered in his chest. "Admiral, they're locking weapons on the colony. If they fired, millions of innocent people would die." But Kane and the others were trapped inside the Valkyrian, running out of time. Holt made the call. "All remaining fleet ships, form a blockade. We hold the line." The last stand inside the Valkyrian. Kane tightened his grip on his pulse rifle, knowing that conventional weapons wouldn't work on something like Holloway. Arya Locke took a step forward, her voice filled with anger and grief. "How are you still alive?" Holloway's head tilted, his grotesque, inhuman body shifting against the walls, wires and tendrils keeping him suspended in the air like a grotesque puppet. "I was chosen," he said. "We were all chosen." "Chosen for what?" Kane demanded. Holloway's smile widened. "To become something greater." The walls of the Valkyrian's core pulsed, and the ship itself seemed to breathe. And then, with a sickening snap, Holloway detached himself from the core, stepping forward. His body, no longer restrained, moved with inhuman grace, his limbs elongated, unnatural. He reached out his hand, and the walls of the ship shifted, creating a grotesque army of humanoid figures, their faces warped and unrecognizable, all staring at Kane's team. "Join us," Holloway whispered. and then they attacked. The escape plan. Kane shouted orders, opening fire as the nightmare-fueled creatures rushed forward, moving too fast to be human. The team's pulse rifles did nothing. Every shot ripped through them. But the creatures reformed instantly, regenerating like liquid metal. Area grabbed Kane's arm. "We can't fight them. We need to destroy the ship." Kane made his decision. He reached for his comm. "Holt, target the Valkyrian's reactor. Prepare for full-scale bombardment." Silence. Then Holt's voice came through, panicked. "Sir, the ship is jamming us. We can't lock onto the core." Kane cursed. That meant only one thing. Someone had to detonate the core manually. Arya realized it at the same moment. She clenched her jaw. "You're not doing this alone, Kane." Kane gave her a small smirk. Didn't plan to. They ran for the core, dodging as the creatures twisted toward them, screeching with voices that weren't entirely human anymore. One of them grabbed Arya's shoulder, but she spun, slamming a plasma grenade into its chest, blasting it apart. They reached the control terminal, the core glowing a sickly black, pulsating like a beating heart. Kane punched in the override codes, setting the core to overload. 2 minutes until detonation. Arya grabbed his arm. "Let's go." But before they could move, Holloway appeared behind them. His twisted form rose from the floor, his limbs snapping into place. His voice was calm, patient, amused. "You still don't understand," he whispered. "You cannot destroy us." The walls of the ship trembled, as if it were alive and angry. "We are beyond death," Holloway said, stepping forward. "We will never stop. We will." Bang! A single shot rang out. Holloway froze. He looked down. A massive hole had appeared in his chest, smoking from the impact. Kane lowered his pistol. "Then we'll just keep killing you." Holloway's smile vanished. And then, the core erupted. The collapse of the Valkyrian. Kane and Arya sprinted for the exit, the ship violently shaking, the organic walls collapsing inward, trying to trap them inside. Behind them, Holloway let out a horrific, deafening scream as the core's energy consumed him. Kane and Arya leaped into the last functioning dropship, sealing the doors as the ship's interior imploded. The dropship launched, escaping just as the Valkyrian detonated. A colossal explosion erupted in the darkness, sending shockwaves across the system. The other corrupted ships began to falter, losing power, breaking apart. Back on the horizon's wrath, Holt shouted in victory. "We did it. The fleet is collapsing." Kane and Arya, breathless and battered, watched from the cockpit as the Valkyrian's remains burned away into nothingness. It was over. Or so they thought. The final warning. As the crew of the Horizon's Wrath celebrated, the AI systems flickered. A new transmission had appeared on screen. Encrypted. Kane frowned, stepping forward. "What the hell is this?" Holt decoded it, his face slowly draining of color. A single holographic recording played. It was Holloway, perfectly intact, standing in an unknown location, surrounded by hundreds of darkened ships, their forms stretching beyond the screen. "You destroyed one of us," he said softly. "But we are infinite." The camera panned, revealing an impossibly large fleet, thousands of ancient warships, all waiting in the depths of space. Holloway's smile returned. "We will see you soon, Admiral." The transmission ended. Silence filled the bridge. Kane exhaled slowly. "Get me Earth Command." Because now he knew the truth. This wasn't the final battle. This was only the beginning.